49.2. All right, so went and Googled it, and there's no question that if you're going by sheer numbers, that there are more people on Mueller's staff who are either registered Democrats than registered Republicans, but it's not 17 to nothing. There might be 9 people out of 17, if 17 is even the number, who've been registered Democrats, 1 or 2 who've been registered Republicans, and the rest unaffiliated. Then you've got political contributions from staffers, and those contributions have been fairly overwhelmingly to Democrats, to the tune of 62 grand to Democrats and just under 3 grand to Republicans. But it's not 17 to nothing, 100% Democrats.
Rick, here's the problem with your reading. There are 9 registered Democrats of the 17, and there are 8 whose registration is not known because we live in America. But of those 8, I believe all of them donated to Obama because donations are public knowledge. They either donated to Obama or Clinton. So they're effectively Democrats, right?
Well, some of them also donated to Republicans.
Well, one of them donated to Obama and gave $2,000 to a Republican politician in his state. And God knows why he did that. But the point is that all 17 are either registered Democrats or actual donators to the Obama or Clinton campaigns.
But they're not all registered Democrats.
Well, they may not be registered, but they donated to Clinton, and it worked.
You also had a couple people on the staff out of the 17 who've been registered Republicans, whether or not they are now.
At some point in their lives, one of them was considered a registered Republican at the age of 18 and is now in their 40s and changed affiliation or is no longer a registered Republican. So it's really pathetic to me that you're maintaining this myth. I don't know who you're fooling or who. I don't know why it's so important for you not to acknowledge that these people are Democrats out to get Trump. And if they weren't, they would do something very simple. They would say, in the next 14 days, we're going to release the proof that Trump colluded with Russia. We're not going to talk about Stormy Daniels or any business deal that some guy that once met Trump in a bar did. We're just going to say we were hired to find out about Russia-Trump collusion, and here's our evidence. But they can't do that because that would end their little game. And it's obvious.
Whether or not you agree with their objectives, at this point, they're not only investigating Trump-Russia collusion, they're also investigating these, and you said, dealings, Trump meets somebody in a bar. These are dealings that potentially involve hundreds of millions of dollars.
Rick, they haven't tied Trump to anything. And the point is that if you have, if you've been given a mandate by the U.S. Attorney General to investigate Trump-Russia collusion, then that's what you investigate. If there is some crime, bribery, or hundreds of millions of dollars, as you say it, then those things should be investigated by the police or the bunco squad or the fraud squad.
Do we have international police?
We have appropriate departments of the U.S. government that would say, aha, we found financial crime. And you don't have a mandate from the Congress and the Attorney General for a special investigator assigned for these financial irregularities. So what this guy Mueller should do is say, look, I was hired to prove Trump-Russia collusion. Here's my evidence. And if he doesn't have any, he would just say, I don't have any. There are some other things I found. I'm referring them to the police. And that would be the end of it. But because he has 17 either registered Democrats or people that donated to Democrats, they're on a witch hunt. And I don't know why you can't accept that. Because it's obvious to everybody else in the United States.
No, come on. It's not obvious to
Oh, it's a balanced, perfectly neutral organization. The Mueller team is a bunch of steadfast and honorable citizens, neutral to the core, and they're treating Trump with the fairness they would treat Abraham Lincoln. Is that what you're telling me? They have no bias, there's no witch hunt?
I think it's closer to that than to what you're presenting.
Really? Really? So let me ask you a question. They've leaked everything. They've leaked things about what they imagine his sex life is. They've burst into a guy Manafort's apartment at 3 a.m. and handcuffed his wife because he happened to be the chairman of the Trump election committee for a month and was fired.
Let me tell you
No, I'm not done. This was never done. This is very unusual to burst into a guy's house and throw him down and handcuff his wife at 3 a.m. They have now broken the attorney-client privilege. They went after Trump's attorney. They're investigating affairs he may have had. But one thing, they have shown no interest in revealing: that Trump colluded with Russia to get elected. And you're telling me that there is no bias. This is not a witch hunt. It's as fair and honorable as possible. Is that what you're telling me?
closer to that than the other. So hold on.
Oh, wait.
Wait. I get to say a thing real quick. What the liberal media that brainwashes me says is that Mueller's team has been very good about not leaking, and all the things you mentioned come from other sources.
Yeah, how do they find out?
Well, because reporters report.
Really?
That they're not getting it from the Mueller team, that they're going out and they're looking at stuff. I mean, as I've said, Trump has been a public figure since the early 80s at least, and there's plenty of information you can go on not even information, but rumors and all this stuff. You don't need to go to the Mueller team to investigate Trump.
Do we need to find out he had an affair? I'm just curious.
What do you mean need to?
Yeah, why is that important?
Ooh, hey, we live in America. We want to find out about all that stuff.
No, don't give me shit. I want to know why you think it's important to talk about his affair when what we want to know is if he colluded with Russia. Why is that something you've got to investigate, Rick? The guy had an affair on his wife 13 years ago.
Yeah, because 12 years ago, because I don't think his penis works anymore.
I was wrong. It was 12 years ago. Now, do you think that's part of the Russia investigation, Rick? Whether the guy had an affair on his wife 12 years ago? Is that something we need to know about? Is that good investigative investigation that will help America?
Whether or not it's good or not, it's something we do now. We know.
So when you're up for a crime, does the DA find out if you had an affair on your wife? When you're up for a financial crime or something, do they look into whether you had an affair 13 years ago?
If it involves payoffs, yeah, I guess so. But I mean, we know
payoffs, and does that involve collusion with Russia?
No.
Oh, okay. So let me get this straight. If he had an affair with Stormy Daniels and he paid her off, that has nothing to do with collusion with Russia.
No, except
so why is Mueller dealing with it?
Well, because
it's a witch hunt.
Nah, it's financial. It's potential
Potential what?
Campaign and financial crimes.
It's not a campaign crime.
Also,
Rick. Rick, it's not a campaign crime. if you want to pay off your mistress, that has nothing to do with the campaign.
If he's-
You could be paying off your mistress so your wife doesn't find out about it.
It could also be obstruction of justice.
Well, how would it be obstruction of justice, Rick, to pay a woman not to tell your wife she had an affair with you?
This starts getting into the I don't know. I've pooped a lot in the last 24 hours. But
All right, let's change the subject, please.
okay. Well, you want to go to a go ahead.
So it related to this. So what you're saying, Rick, is there has to be a certain demeanor now that he's president.
Well, I'm just saying that demeanor is not nothing. It's not everything, but it's not nothing. We've had two in our lifetimes, and we're old guys, so we've encompassed, I don't know, roughly a dozen presidents since we were born. Two of those presidents were the greatest of our lifetime at public image. One was a Democrat, Kennedy. One was a Republican, Reagan. And if you look at demeanor's a thing. It has something to do with the whole job of being president. Whether it's essential, no, it's not. But it does people's opinion of how somebody is as president is influenced by their demeanor. Like Lincoln went from being like loathed and considered an ugly guy. I mean, some little girl wrote him and said, "Hey, maybe you should grow a beard because your face is a mess." So he grows a beard. And then it turns out in his tallness and his sadness and his sense of humor, his bereftness, everything kind of was fit in with him being the prosecutor of the Civil War and the conscience of the country. And in the 150 years since Lincoln, we've decided that how he was as president during this war that was terrible for the country makes him perhaps the greatest president in history. Then in our lifetimes, you've got Kennedy who, getting killed. I mean, like it's like being an artist. Like if Lance fakes his death, the price of his paintings triples. Kennedy being assassinated, Kennedy didn't do that much as president. He screwed up the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. He showed some kind of forthrightness, steadfastness that as he faced down Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then, he suggests that man goes to the moon, and then he gets himself killed after only about 1,000 days in office. John also had great hair, was a good-looking guy, had a good-looking wife, played touch football at the family compound in Hyannisport. Seemed like a cool guy president. I don't know. Now I'm tired of this whole discussion myself. We can move on to something else.
But you said that there was demeanor that every president should have.
Well, not should have, but I mean it's super helpful. Like for one thing, like the last president who was commonly seen wearing glasses was Truman 60 years ago. Every president is of the age that they wear They have to wear glasses sometime. Lance has to wear glasses sometime. I wear glasses sometime. So presidents wear glasses, but you hardly ever see presidents wearing glasses, because that's not FDR wore glasses, Truman, but you don't see any more recent presidents going around, wantonly wearing reading glasses. So appearance counts. Frickin' Reagan had suspiciously black hair throughout his administration. And Reagan was fantastically effective as a politician because people felt good watching Reagan in action. He seemed big and patriotic and full of humor. And Reagan bravely got shot and then had a quip. He had a loving relationship with his wife, and then he gets shot, and then among his first words after coming out of surgery, he says, "Mommy, I forgot to duck," which is super endearing.
So you don't find this president endearing?
No. I remember being super kind of pissed off at Clinton because I hoped that Clinton, was it Reagan who was called the Teflon president because nothing stuck?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I wanted Clinton to be the Democratic Teflon president, but he wasn't. Everything stuck to him. Every woman who accused him of something, it became a big deal, and he seemed to have this big appetite for junk food. He jogged to McDonald's, at least on SNL he would, and he was not Teflon at all. So yeah, I think demeanor is an ingredient.
So what are you saying about? Do you think Trump has a good demeanor?
He has a demeanor that annoys, I'd say, not an overwhelming majority, but a majority of the country, and then kind of inspires his base to defend him as a maverick, as a swamp drainer, as a non-politician who's coming in to clean out the rot and the muck. But he's a divisive guy. Every president in our lifetimes has been, but Trump more than anybody else. And it's not entirely. Part of it is demographics, and part of it is gerrymandering. But yeah, he's a divisive guy, a divisive presence.
Well, I'm unfortunately going to have to repeat something I said. The most divisive president in my lifetime is Obama. And I have proof. Because after a grand jury of mainly black witnesses as the determiners acquitted that cop for shooting that Michael Brown in Missouri, it turned out that the Michael Brown hadn't said hands up, don't shoot. He had lunged at the cop and attacked him. And he was a big guy, big football player, and by sheer luck, the cop was able to shoot him in the head after they fought back and forth. Now, not only did the grand jury acquit the cop, but so did but the grand jury was acquitted him on testimony of black people, and the Obama administration attorney general had to drop the charges too, because he found out that indeed the cop had been defending himself. But that didn't stop your buddy Obama from going to the UN and claiming that this incident was an example of white cops murdering innocent black people that were unarmed. He actually said, what was the name of the town? Ferguson. Yeah, he mentioned Ferguson in a litany of the great racial injustices in the United States. So this guy, Obama, was such a divisive, racist, race-baiting scumbag that he went to the UN knowing that the cop was innocent and raised it as an example of America being a deeply racist society, and pointing out that the implication being that cops are deliberately shooting unarmed black men. Now, it can't possibly get any more divisive than that. And no matter how many times I mention this to Rick, It doesn't matter.
I'm just saying.
Trump is still more divisive because he has a New York accent and funny hair. But when you're actually actively working to turn black people against white people in the United States so that there will be the beginnings of a race war, that's not a problem for the Democrats. That's not divisive.
Yeah, well, Ferguson is a problem. I'm picking Michael Brown as your exemplar of an innocent victim. There's probably better, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of better victims to pick as your exemplar. But what I'm saying in general is, in terms of demeanor, is Obama conducted himself with more dignity than Trump often does.
I remember that when ISIS first rose up, people were shocked because they were taking the women and raping them en masse. It was very important for ISIS to rape as many women as possible, and then they would cut off the heads of little children. And some people, not Rick or the Democrats, blamed Obama for pulling the troops out prematurely when he was asked by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to leave a base there to fight ISIS.
Well,
But he pulled them out. No, you will not interrupt me.
All right.
He pulled the troops out, and when they were chopping off the heads of the little children and putting them on spikes, and there are pictures on the internet of that, Obama, who conducted himself with such grace, went to a prayer breakfast, a Sunday, the annual prayer breakfast, and told the Christians, don't get on your high horse about ISIS. What about the Crusades?
Let me say this.
The man that had annual Ramadan celebrations in the White House.
Did he have Christmas too?
He might have.
Did he?
I don't know, but we never
Hanukkah.
had Ramadan before.
All right. So let me
Now,
give you.
Real quick, was
Hold
this
on. I got a thing to say
before-
first. Hold on. I'll give you that. You could argue, and I don't think I could argue against it thoroughly. Obama's demeanor, his aura of calmness, may have led him to actions or lack of actions that were not the best. That he was called no drama Obama. Some of his decisions probably could have used more drama. His calm demeanor is associated with certain no conflict or decisions that were not tough. And so, yeah, he could have and probably should have kept troops in Iraq.
Big moment. Big
No, not a
moment
huge
for
one.
Lance versus Rick show. Thank you, Rick. I'd like to welcome you to the sane world.
Yep,
Thank you.
So, all right. But so that's why I'm saying demeanor isn't everything. You could have, but it is some. But in the case of Obama, where you've got like the famous series of Key and Peele sketches, Obama's anger translator, where Obama just never got angry and hardly ever, showed, he was too calm, and he was too non-confrontational, I would say.
Yeah. You know what? He was very angry. He actually, when the Israelis had a way of preventing the Iranians from developing their nuclear reactors so that they could get uranium together so that they could kill us, they had a program called the Stuxnet program, where the Israelis were fucking up the Iranian computers.
It was they had a computer virus or a computer worm that got into the centrifuge
Yeah.
software and then
Yeah.
made the centrifuges spin out of control.
Yeah, and Obama revealed that. Now, he didn't get angry. He just revealed that to the New York Times so that the Iranians would be able to continue developing uranium that they could use for nuclear power and ultimately weaponry. So he wasn't an angry man. He didn't have to lose his temper. He just revealed that to the New York Times.
All right, next thing. What you had a question? And
Yes, this is all kind of related to this. There is speculation that, well, Obama's ratings were really in the tank, and then Trayvon Martin happened. And that was kind of like the speculation based on an article that I read was that was the
Where'd you read the article?
I don't remember the source, but that starting with Trayvon Martin, then Obama took on the mantle of then the Black Lives Matter movement took on, and that helped Obama. That kind of just got him out of the tank in terms of popularity. Is there any validity to that? Lance first, and then Rick.
Well, statistically, as I've said before, a Harvard professor, a black Harvard professor, proved that white cops are less likely to shoot an unarmed black man performing the same crime as a white man because they're afraid of being called racist, they speculate. So there's no basis for Obama to believe that white cops were hunting down black men and murdering them because of sheer racism. So it has always been the strategy of the Democrat Party to win by turning the races against each other. They used to do this back in the 19th century in New York with the Irish and the Italians. It's, in fact, even the Civil War was the Democrat Party supporting slavery against the Republicans that wanted to end it. So race baiting has always been the favorite tactic of the Democrat Party.
Kinda. The Republicans and the Democrats have switched roles at least once.
The Republicans have never done anything to hurt black people. It's always been Jim Crow was Democrats.
The Southern
and the
Nixon's
Civil War
Southern strategy
didn't hurt It was not.
it was to appeal to Southern races.
No, that's propaganda.
Well,
That's
what was it?
propaganda. The Southerners were Democrats. They voted for George Wallace.
Yeah, and then they got pissed at Johnson when Johnson passed civil rights legislation.
And they voted for George Wallace. They didn't vote for Nixon.
Nixon tried to win him over. That was his Southern strategy.
When they finally voted for Nixon instead of McGovern, it's because McGovern wanted to lose the Vietnam War. He was considering legalizing drugs, and he was very pro-abortion, and that upset the Southerners, as it would any conservative.
Anyway, Nixon had a Southern strategy to win the votes of and since Johnson, the Southern states have primarily have been Republican. All right, next thing.
But since then, the Southern states have not been noted for any great racism. In the modern era, the greatest racism has always come from the Democrats, and that's what Obama was doing when he tried to turn Americans against each other by using trumped up lies about black oppression.
If you look back at the coverage of the time, Obama got a lot of criticism for not talking about it enough from certain quarters.
Well, I don't care if he got criticism. He was right to do that because it's not the job of the American president, unless I guess you're a Democrat, to turn black Americans and white Americans against each other. What the hell was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to turn blacks and whites against each other? Would that have mollified you and the Democrats?
No, but I mean,
So it was a
pointing out
bad
that
idea for the president of all the people to decide to pick sides
well,
and turn them against each other.
pointing out that some cops, due to inadequate training, are a little bit too shooty, regardless of race. And yeah, race comes into it hugely.
Race, but I just told you, there was a Harvard professor, a black Harvard professor, that proved that the cops are not hunting black people. They are not predominantly racist. That black people are killed less than white people for the same crimes. So it's just not true.
What about
there are bad cops.
Yeah.
But it's not the president of the United States business
Well,
to turn the people against the cops,
But it might
and
be
to
the-
turn white against black.
it might be the job of the president to point out that cops need better training. All right, next thing.
Yes, there's a lot of tweets as evidence where Trump was boldly against Obama interfering in the Syrian crisis, and now lo and behold, Trump is doing exactly what
There's
he
a
did.
saying on Twitter that goes, there's a Trump tweet for everything. And the deal is, Trump has been very active on Twitter since Twitter began, which was, 2008, 2009. Trump has tweeted, probably 30,000 times. So it's funny. It's somewhat fair, but it's not 100% fair to dig up the appropriate Trump tweet that shows he's a hypocrite or has double standards, one for Obama as president, another for him as president. Because as a private individual, tweeting out, anybody can be an idiot on Twitter. I've tweeted about 31,000 times.
What's your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle, @dumbassgenius. That is more than 500,000 words. That's like 6 thick-ass books. That's almost as many words as there are in the George R.R. Martin series that was turned into Game of Thrones. It's at the same time, you can say, yeah, he does have all these double standards. But here, I'm going to, just to make things proceed a little faster, Obama set up a red line against Assad in Syria, and then he didn't bomb the crap out of Assad when Assad crossed the red line being do not nerve gas, do not use chemical weapons against your people. I would say that most people agree that we should have bombed the shit out of Syria at that point. Maybe not the shit out of Syria, but at least do some limited bombing, the way Trump has done. Lance?
All right. Well, what I think is most interesting about this whole thing is when you look at the degree of damage that Obama did to the world, it fascinates me because as bad as Obama was, as irresponsible and destructive, every year that goes by, we realize how bad that it was actually worse. It was actually worse than I thought initially. One of the worst things about it is that for 20 years, the Russians had not had a foothold in the Middle East. They were actually driven from the Middle East. The Middle East was free of Russia. And Obama, actually, the Russians in the beginning feared the United States. And what happened was they waited to see what Obama would do, and when they saw that he was completely impotent, they actually waited and watched, realized that the United States was now being led by a man that was confused and weak, possibly traitorous, that's my guess. And they actually thought, okay, well, if the U.S. isn't going to do anything, we're going to lodge a few thousand troops in Syria. And now Syria is under the control of Russia. And it's sort of like, so Trump now is stuck. He's given a situation where the previous American president was so weak, so incompetent, so foolish, that he actually allowed the Russians to take over a country in the Middle East. And this country is hemorrhaging people. It is in complete chaos. Don't you interrupt me.
I was going to burp.
And Trump is now left trying to figure out how can I keep there from being a complete chaotic slaughter because of Obama and the Democrats.
All right. Any reason?
And so what Trump is doing is he's saying, okay, we can carve out a small piece of Syria where we can try to keep some semblance of law and safety for a small percentage of the Syrian people. And that's the best I can do with the mess that Obama created.
All right, so any reasonable person would have to note at this point that when it comes to effing up the Middle East in earnest, on a mass scale, it began in 2003 with the invasion of Iraq.
Bush had nothing to do with Syria. Nothing.
Yeah,
Not one single life was taken in Syria because of any of Bush's actions.
Nothing.
Nothing.
You're an
Syria collapsed 3 years into the Obama administration.
You consider yourself an expert on Vietnam, right? Pretty much. I mean, more than most people, right? I mean, come on. You have this own. You know a lot about Vietnam, right?
Get to your point.
Domino theory, right? That one reason that we wanted to keep Vietnam is one argument was that the domino theory, that you line up a bunch of dominoes, and then the metaphor is countries, that if Vietnam falls, then Cambodia falls, then Laos falls, that it's not just about Vietnam, it's about all these other countries. Do you buy that argument?
This argument that Iraq had anything to do with Syria is complete fantasy.
Well, I know that for...
Why didn't Jordan fall? They're right next to Iraq, too.
Well, for 10
They're
years
close.
or more...
I don't know if they border.
Yeah, for 10 years or more, you had Iraq and Iran fighting each other. And
It has nothing to do with Syria, Rick.
And
It's not Bush's fault. It's all Obama's fault.
you forgive Bush everything, and you blame Obama
Because
for
nobody was
everything.
dying in Syria during the Obama administration. In fact, no one was dying during the first couple of years no one was dying during the Bush administration in Syria, and for the first couple of years of the Obama administration, no one was dying.
Now,
It was entirely Obama's fault. It had nothing to do with
You blame
Bush.
Obama for ISIS, right?
Yes.
But a lot of ISIS comes from the aftermath of the Iraq invasion, when you have all these Baathists who get fired from the Iraq military because we disbanded the military. A lot of those guys go off and they form seed organizations that eventually turn into ISIS. I mean, everything about the Iraq war under Bush was good. Everything under Obama was bad.
Right. That's right. We won the Iraq war, and the job of Obama, all he had to do, as I've said a million times, is leave 10,000 troops in Iraq, and they would have been able to take care of ISIS or anybody else. ISIS began using Jeeps and SUVs and old beat-up Mercedes, and they would drive around the country using pistols and rifles. And they would have been destroyed like that by American military power if Obama had left them there. The destabilization was caused entirely by Obama.
No, the initial
You
destabilization.
just admitted it 20 minutes ago.
Well,
I shook your hand.
No,
it was
all I
on
said.
camera. We filmed it.
All I said was Obama should have left troops there. But the
And what would those troops have done?
they maybe could have held off ISIS, but
Yeah.
the initial
That's using your
the
noggin.
initial destabilization. Well, it's ridiculous to talk about the initial destabilization of the Middle East because the Middle East has always been effed up in certain ways. But the big recent destabilization of the Middle East began with Bush and the invasion of Iraq. Now, you can't blame
Rick,
Obama on everything and blame
Rick,
blame Bush
Rick,
for nothing.
Saddam, okay, we have to talk about it then.
Come
Saddam invaded Kuwait,
Yeah, in '91, and we drove him out easily.
right?
And then we-
right, yeah, and so he was a destabilizing influence. He also attacked Iran.
Well, they attacked each other back
No,
and
no,
forth.
he's the one that began the war against
Okay.
Iran.
But I mean, but that war was from a geopolitical point of view. It was terrible for the people in those countries, but it was kind of good for every place else because they were shooting their various wads against each other and not effing up the rest of the region and the world.
But it was Saddam Hussein that was the destabilizing influence in the Middle East, not Bush.
Bush goes in and
Why did he go in, Rick? Was he just a mean person?
well, because his argument was that, well, two arguments. One, that they had something, that Iraq had something to do with 9/11,
Which they did.
which they didn't, and that Bush.
Well, how do
that-
you know that, by the way?
The liberal media that brainwashes me, like
No, but-
all the
but
articles
really,
I
but
read.
really, how do you know? How do they know?
All the stuff I've
Wouldn't
read.
this stuff be secret, Rick?
Then you start getting into big walls of yarn. The Occam's
I'm just saying, if you didn't know any better, if you weren't a Democrat, and you had this guy Saddam Hussein, and a couple of years after war with the U.S., New York is attacked, the worst it's ever been in history. Would you think to yourself, gee, I wonder if that guy Saddam had anything to do with this?
I'd want
Would you be
evidence.
certain? Would you be certain that he was as innocent as a lamb?
I'd want better evidence before committing trillions of bucks. Well, they didn't know it was going to be trillions of bucks to go to war against Iraq. But
You'd want better evidence. So it's just you can't kind of put two and two together.
no, not when you go to war against a country and take out its leader. No,
Okay.
no,
okay.
you can't.
And I'm telling you.
I mean, I
that
guess you
we're-
can 'cause they did, but-
Okay. Okay. Let's go over it again. One. He gassed the Kurds. It was a violation of the Geneva Convention. It was a war crime. Thousands of people were killed. That's a justification for attacking him and taking him out. Two, he attacked our planes. We had a no-fly zone over Iraq. He attacked them. That's a justification for war. Three, we knew that he had used chemical weapons because he used them against his own people. That's a justification for war if your major city has just been attacked and you're worried about weapons of mass destruction.
No, that's a big leap in.
No, it isn't. No. If if your major city's just been attacked and your greatest enemy in the world is playing around with chemical weapons that could kill 1 million people in New York, you attack them.
When did he gas the Kurds? What year?
He gassed the Kurds several times. He gassed them after the Gulf War. After we defeated.
How long after?
I don't know the
Gulf?
date.
All right. So, according to most people, he'd gotten rid of his weapons of mass destruction.
The same people that can assure you he had nothing to do with 9/11. So you believe that?
So you're going to go to
Wait,
war.
wait. You're certain he gave away his chemical weapons.
You're
You're also certain he had nothing to do with 9/11. These are things that only you believe. No one else is believing these things.
No,
it's impossible for you to believe
majority-
that Saddam Hussein might have kept some chemical weapons and might have helped attack New York. That's inconceivable.
They
to
looked
you.
for chemical weapons and they didn't
They
find them.
found them.
They
chemical
found
weapons
old
all
dumps.
over the desert.
No. They found old crappy no longer good stuff that had been dumped in the desert, not stockpiled in the desert, but disposed of, kind of thrown away like toxic dumping.
Okay, he was
So-
killing his
so
own people. In fact, he was killing 100,000 of his own people a year, which is another reason that war is justified.
Is
we
it
can do
to
that.
go into
we could do that. If Honduras was killing 100,000 people a year, we would have justification to attack them.
The most expensive war in American history, we go, well, probably not necessarily adjusted, but one of the most expensive wars in American history. We go in on a suspicion that he had something to do with 9/11, and because,
Which is good enough for me, by the way.
well, all right, I did not.
Because I care about New York enough to take the risk.
All right, that's
I was pissed off about New York.
yeah, that's
about
why you
9/11.
became a conservative. Let's break, because I'm
Before we break,
yeah.
can you just give us a quick perspective on, okay, two things. Okay, it's actually three things, and really, really fast, because give us your impressions in terms of this being, when it involved not only the U.S. in terms of bombing, but it involved Britain and France.
The latest Syria bombing was
Yeah.
three people on the team with with other countries saying, yeah, go do it. So yeah, you got Britain, France, and the U.S. They each took. There were 3 targets taken out in Syria. I think each of the countries took out one of the targets. Is that right?
I don't know.
Something like that. So I'm okay with that. I mean, it seems like the appropriate response.
And
Then you would have been okay with attacking Iraq for doing the same thing.
I'm not sure I'd be okay with
But that's one of the
invading
ju-
Iraq, taking out its leader, and having
You're on
crappy
you'd
plans.
Be happy. You'd be more happy if Saddam was still in charge of Iraq.
well. I mean, it's one of those deals like we don't know what to do with Assad, like because at this point it looks like if you take out Assad, you facilitate a lot of militias that we don't want in charge of Syria.
And I told you, Obama could have destroyed the Syrian army
So
in days.
What I've been saying is there was a better time to deal with this, and there was a time at which you could have.
And Obama didn't do it.
Yeah, but I already said, yeah, he should have done it. So you can shake my hand again, or we can take a break.
oh, just really quick, and this is the last two things.
If the guy needs a
what-
break, give him a break.
What is your prediction for Russia's response? And then lastly, other than Russia having nuclear weapons, can you give us a more or less, what is Russia like? Are they really that big of a
This
country?
is a long discussion. Give him a break.
Okay,
seriously.
we'll come back. We'll talk about Russia. Thank you.